let's take a gander at the distinction between the left wing and the right wing. And I don't mean to say this in a particular concrete political sense. I'm not going to be talking about any policies. I just want to draw a distinction between what these things actually mean, or at least the way that I use them. So, of course, first of all, I want to distinguish between the left and the right, but I also want to distinguish between the conventional left and the conventional right. So I think the best way to describe either the first the left and then the right is that I'm going to describe the conventional side of these sides of the political spectrum first, and then I'm going to describe the radical side of them after. So let's take a look at the left wing. Now, what the left wing is in the conventional sense is it looks at what the status quo is for the time being, and it looks to see what is missing from the status quo, what is being, what is not, what the system clearly is always going to be flawed. The system exists, the status quo exists to solve a set of problems, and the left wing is essentially there to see all the places wherein the status quo has not succeeded in its task of resolving the set of problems for which it was designed. And of course, that reflects itself in the personality disposition of people who are typically on the left, which is that they're more open, or more open people tend to gravitate to the left, because if you're into novelty, obviously the left wing is going to be more interesting to you. You're not going to be interested in the status quo because, you know, it's there. It's the same every day. If you're a person who likes novelty, you want something new, and of course, therefore, the left wing is going to be more appealing. But on the right wing now, we have to appreciate the reason that the right wing exists, and it exists because once we've solved a problem, there's this attitude of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's actually quite a wise attitude because, I mean, we all do this. If we all wake up at the same time every day, you might say, why am I doing this every day? Why am I getting up at the same time every day and going to the same job? But of course, you have to justify it to yourself. Being quite rational doing it, you say, well, I need to pay the bills, you know, I need to have something to do with my days. So we're all going to have a conservative element in ourselves. Even the most novelty-seeking person doesn't actually seek novelty all day long. It's just impossible to live that way. So the difference in the dispositional quality between a conservative person, a person who's conservative by disposition, and a person who is liberal by disposition, left-wing by disposition, is not absolute. It's more just that the left-wing person is more open to new things, and the conservative person puts more emphasis on the tradition and on status quo. So that's the conventional branches of each of these sides of the political spectrum. So let's take a little gander right now at the left wing and try and distinguish the radical left from the radical right. And I think, for me, it seems that the defining quality of the radical left, which distinguishes it from the conventional left, is that the radicals deny hierarchy and they deny any amount of difference in outcomes on principle. So, where a conventional left-wing person would see the status quo and they'd say, okay, well, the status quo, it's obviously serving a function. So let's take as it's, for instance, at the medical institutions of whatever country you're in. There's clearly a function that is being served by these medical institutions. If you break your arm, you can go there and get it fixed. And having no institutions would obviously be worse. So the conventional liberal person, they would say, okay, well, we have this medical institution, and it serves an incredible function, but there are still a whole lot of problems with it. In some countries, certainly, access to the medical institution might be very difficult. It might seem that, you know, maybe if there's a huge money barrier to getting in, that could be a concern, and that concern is typically held by people on the left. Whereas the radical left, unlike the conventional left, instead of just looking at these institutions and seeing that there are problems and trying to push those institutions towards a resolution of those problems, trying to patch up the holes, the radical would say, no, the institution is just too far gone and we need to get rid of it altogether. At best, they might say something like, this is a real radical, would say something like, best case scenario is we get rid of it as it is and we rebuild it entirely. but oftentimes they just think that the system shouldn't be there in the first place. Now, I don't think any radical is actually suggesting that we have no medical infrastructure, but it's certainly the case that I think you could probably find, at least on the internet somewhere, a person who thinks that we should entirely dismantle the medical industry and rebuild it in the image of their own worldview. So that's my distinction between radical left and conventional left. And let's take a look at the right wing. So obviously the conventional right, I've already given them a little look. They are just the status quo, the ain't broke, don't fix it attitude. Take a look back again at our example of the medical institution, and the conservative would be prone to say something like, well, the idea of getting rid of this institution is just so absurd, because then we'd have no recourse once we're sick, and things would just fall apart. So I mentioned that on the left there's this dispositional quality of being attracted to novelty. On the right, the corresponding dispositional quality is attraction to duty, conscientiousness. So where a conventional leftist would look at the medical institution, they would see all the problems with it and the ways that it could improve. A conventional right-wing person would look at it and think, what an incredible achievement it is, and they look at all the doctors and they say what duty these doctors are displaying by dedicating themselves to helping others. And that's a very conventional right-wing thing to do, just to respect authority and tradition and status quo, because they're not attracted to novelties as much, so they don't see the appeal of changing it, and because they're more bound by duty than the left wing in their disposition, they interpret these institutions, they look at the medical institution, and what they see, instead of opportunity for growth, is they see an incredible edifice that has taken a long time to build, and which serves a very important function in society. To distinguish between the conventional right and the radical right. Essentially, obviously, if we look in the last century, classic radical right wing would be, Hitler. And the defining character of him would be violent identitarianism, I think. So or if I could put it more generally, I said that the radical left was defined by a complete rejection of the status quo. It's moved away from improving the status quo to rejecting it outright. On the right, it's moving from giving respect to tradition and the status quo to just denying any amount of growth is possible. Believing that we are in the finished state is a right-wing attitude. And the reason that is a problem is if you think that you've got it all sorted out right now, and we say, okay, well, it's too good to give it up. We respect the tradition, we respect the work of our fathers. We can't undo it, so we're never going to change it. If you take that attitude, well, time will wear away. Doesn't matter how good your system is. Given enough time, it will fall apart. Time always comes up with new challenges, and you can never predict what's going to happen given enough time. So if we stick too far to the right, what happens is we go stale. We try and follow this one path of action, but it gets to a point where that path of action just inevitably stops serving its function, because time changes the environment. The action has to be updated to what the actual world is. You can imagine a sort of backwards farmer. Let's take the what do you call those people who live in the woods in America, the Amish. They're kind of like that, too far right wing, where they are so committed and respectful of tradition that they can't see that they're hamstringing themselves by denying progress. Now, maybe you could actually argue with them that the flaws of modern society are so great that just going to the bush and living there with your own little group is justified. I'm not trying to insult their particular society, but I'm just trying to explicate this point of the right wing. The radical right wing is the right wing which says we will never change. We have got there. My nation is perfect. So the reality is, that all of these conventions, so I said institutions before, conventions kind of means the same thing, so all of our institutions or conventions, they're necessary fictions. So the institutions, having our institutions the way they are, set up based on the theories that they are for now, those are always provisional. They're like scientific theories. They don't last forever. So if we try and stick to one system, given enough time, it'll eventually just collapse. We have to update them based on new information. At the same time, we have to also respect the fact that it took a lot of effort to get them to where they are in the first place. So if we are going to dismantle the systems which serve us very well, we should be extremely careful that we only dismantle them in the minimum way necessary to create the change that we need. Because obviously if we just dismantle them entirely, we're going to find ourselves in a position where we don't have any institutions or conventions left, and anarchy is not an ingredient for human flourishing. So while these conventions are fictions, I describe them as necessary fictions because they're not entirely arbitrary. They are fictions created to help us solve real problems. And that might be kind of what Jordan Peterson was getting at when he says that he tries to give his maps of meaning, and he says, our cultures live by a certain map of meaning. It's our image of the world and of our place in it and how it's going to serve us in our actual lives. And when we run up against another group that has a map that doesn't match ours, we don't just interpret them as being someone who has a different set of ideas, but we interpret them as being someone who's actually going to tear apart our own worldview. But it's been the reason that we feel that so strongly is because those maps of meaning are there to solve actual problems. So that they are useful fictions, but all we have is useful fictions. So to throw something out simply because it's a fiction is it's premature, and it's just going to lead to chaos and anarchy. So yeah, I would say that what we ought to do is we ought to just be a little clear on our distinctions between the conventional branches of the left wing and the right wing and the radical branches. Now, I'm not entirely certain if there is so much confusion with the distinction between the radical and conventional right wing as there is with the radical and conventional left wing. Although, I will say that if we look at the right wing in the modern world, oftentimes it doesn't even seem that it does care about tradition. It's so dominated by corporate interest that we're getting this incredible, very strange distortion. And I suspect that my schema that I've laid forth here may actually break down in our modern world of so many representations. We're so many steps away from the real reality of things that I think that this kind of basic schema might not last. It might be a useful fiction which has passed its use-by date. Be that as it may, I still think that whatever schema that we do come to, it's going to have to be a logical progression from this schema which I've laid out. That is if I'm correct. But, I'm an arrogant asshole, so I probably am. Anyway.